Hello everyone, welcome to this video where I will be showing you how to use flask-marshmallow and marshmallow-sqlalchemy, two Flask extensions for validating your data from your requests, as well as serializing the data back to JSON. So without any further ado, let's jump into the code and I'll show you exactly what I mean. So if we jump into our terminal here, let's install our two extensions. So we're going to say poetry add flask, and then we're going to say marshmallow. So we're going to wait for that to install. So once that installs, we're going to install the other extension. So we're going to say poetry add, and then we're going to say marshmallow, and then dash SQL-alchemy. And that is for helping us work with our ORM, which in our case is SQL-alchemy. So I'm going to close my terminal. And then we're going to go into our extensions. Okay, so here we need to add the extension that we've installed. So we're going to say MA is equal to marshmallow. I'm going to instantiate this and we're going to import it from flask-marshmallow. Okay, so once that is done, we are done with our extensions file. So I'm going to close this. And just a small recap from the previous videos, we've worked with Flask migrate. We created a couple of migrations. But I've deleted one of them, and essentially what I've done was, if we go into our models, I've removed username and I've made the name required. So once we've got that, we're going to go to our database and we're going to try and fetch our users. So here we don't have any users, so we need to seed the database. So I've created a file here for seeding to make it easier. So what we're doing, we're reading the users.sql file here that we had from previous video, and then we read that file, and then with the application context we execute the statement and commit the transaction. So if I run that by saying python 3 and then seed.py, that file runs, and if I check here, we've got all of our users. Okay, so now that we have seeded our database, let's start with creating our schemas, which is where Marshmallow comes into play. So if we go and head to our API package here, within this one we've created a resource package previously. So here is where the schemas will sit. So we're going to say create a Python package, and here we're going to say schemas. And within the schemas, you can declare all of the schemas that you want to create. In my case, we're going to create a user file where we're going to add several of our schemas. So here I'm going to say class user schema. So our schemas are classes and they extend marshmallow. So if we do MA here, okay, so MA is the extension that we created, we can say SQL-alchemy auto schema, schema, or SQL-alchemy schema. So if you select schema here, you've got to specify all the fields from your database, or all the fields that you want to serialize and deserialize from JSON and also validate. But because we're using SQL-alchemy, and we want this to be made a bit easier for us, we can use SQL-alchemy auto schema. So I'll explain exactly what this does. But in order for this to work, you need to specify some metadata. Or a metadata class within this class that we're creating here. So here we're going to say class meta. And if this is some weird syntax that you've never seen before, essentially you can create classes within a class in Python, and the most common use case is to create a meta class, which is for metadata. So it's a way to declare data that is not part of the main class, so you can use them to perform some sort of logic. So here we want to specify model, and then we want to specify our user model. So I'm going to import that. And this is all you need to start working with Marshmallow. So I'm going to close this file. okay? And here we're going to go into our resources, into our users, and here this is the API we've had. So I'm not going to change anything here, so I'm going to go into my terminal and start the server. So I'm going to say python 3 app.py. So we start the server is running on port 8000. So if we head to Postman and check if our API works correctly, so we're going to go here, we can fetch all of our users from our database, we can fetch a single user, excellent, this works. So here we're going to start modifying it so it can use Marshmallow. So here, for fetching all of our users, we're using JSONify. So we're going to stop using JSONify. So we're going to delete this and we're going to do it in a dictionary format because Marshmallow will serialize our data. So I'm going to do this. This is not going to work because we need to tell it somehow to serialize it. And for that, we need the schema from Marshmallow. So we're going to say schema, and then we're going to use the schema that we just created. So we're going to say user schema, and then we're going to instantiate that class. And then this instance has a method on it called dump. So we're going to say schema.dump. Okay. And we're going to go to Postman to check this. So this is not going to work. So we're getting results in an empty dictionary. So why is that the case? The reason is because here we're returning many users. So here, whenever you're returning many, you need to tell the schema that you're returning many. And exactly many is a many keyword, and we need to set that to true. So we're going to go back and make this request. And here we get all of our users. And if we go back and head to our models, here we specified a data class, and we do not need this anymore because this information about how to serialize our models is done all through Marshmallow. So if we retry this request, it works correctly. However, here we get ID. And most of the times you don't want to expose this data to your end user. Okay, you don't want to specify how many users you've got in your database. So you can either hash that or you can omit that. In my case, for simplicity's sake, I am going to omit it. So how do we do that? So you head to your schemas and the schema we created. And within our meta class, we can specify an exclude. Okay. And here, this is a list, and we're going to set ID to within our exclude list. So if we head back to Postman and remake this request, the ID is gone. Excellent. So let's head to our resources. Get is done. And now we need to sort post. So how do we do this? So like we did with get, we're going to create a variable here called schema, and we're going to instantiate our user schema. Here we're not going to say many because we're only dealing with one. Okay, so we need to validate the data that comes from the request. So here I'm going to say validated data. Okay. Well, this is not validated data, the request.json. However, in order to validate the data, we can use the schema. So we can say schema.load. So previously we used dump. Now we need to load data into our schema, not out of our schema. And we pass the request.json. For now, I'm going to comment all of this stuff here. And I'm going to remove user. Okay. And if we head back to Postman and we go to post. Okay. So here, if we make the request, okay, we're getting some sort of weird exception, marshmallow exception, and we're not getting a JSON response. We're getting HTML. This is not what we want. So essentially, Marshmallow will throw an exception and we need to handle that. So how do we do that? So if we head back to our IDE, if you remember, in the beginning of this series, we created a views folder within our API package. So if we head to views, here is what we need to do, something. So we've created a blueprint and we need to access that blueprint. So we're going to say blueprint dot error handler, and then we're going to pass here a validation error, and I'll explain exactly what this does. So we're going to import this from marshmallow, and then we're going to do something. Okay, so here we need to define a function. So this is a decorator and we need to decorate one of our functions, and here I'm going to call this handle marshmallow error, and here we're going to accept the exception, okay, because validation error is an exception, okay, and then we need to do something. So what are we doing here? So essentially we're telling the blueprint, okay, of our API that for error handling of this specific class, which is an exception, so whenever this exception is thrown, we need to handle it with this function here. So we receive the exception and we need to do something. So what we do here is we return, because we want to return something to the front end, and here we use JSONify. This is the only place we will use JSONify. So we're going to say e.messages. So the exception has our error messages within it, so we're going to JSONify that, and then as a second parameter we're going to pass 400. And this is because whenever we get a validation error, we want the status code to be 400. So if I head back to Postman and I retry this request, we get JSON, which is correct, and we get it formatted really nicely. So our age has a list of errors, the same with email and the same with name. And these come out of the box from flask-marshmallow and also marshmallow-sqlalchemy. So essentially what happens is, if we go into our schemas, here we've defined user, the user model, and here we've said SQLAlchemy auto schema. So what this does, it goes to our model and has a look, and it says name nullable false. So this means that the name is required. So this is how it translates it. It says, hey, the name is required, you haven't added it. The email is required and you haven't added it, and the age is required and you haven't added it. However, this is the basic validation it gives you. Some of the times, or many of the times, you want to override that, okay? Because for example, the name, I just don't just want a name, I want a name of a specific length, and maybe I want a specific error message. So the way you do that is you type here the name of your column, and in my case it's name, and here you say string. So you import string from marshmallow.fields, okay? And you instantiate this and you say required is equal to true, and here is the extra validation that we're going to add. So validate takes either a single item or a list, okay? I'm going to pass a list, and here I'm just going to say validate, and we're going to import that from marshmallow.validate, and we're going to say validate.length, and here what we're saying is we want a specific length, so you can have a minimum, maximum, or somewhere in between. So in my case, I only care about the minimum, so I want the name to be at least 3 characters long, so I'm going to say minimum of 3. So we need to do something similar for our email. So I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to say email, okay? So just space this a bit. So Our email, well, it can be a string and it is a string. It's required. However, we don't just want a specific length like we did here. What we want here, validate has a lot of classes within it. So we're going to say email. And this one doesn't need anything within it. So this will make sure that the email that the user passes is valid. Now, what else do we have? So if we go here, we've got the age. So the age, because it's an integer, I'm not going to bother, I'm not going to bother about the length. It can be anything. I mean, you could theoretically have it up to 3 characters or 3 digits, but I'm going to leave it like that for now. So I'm not going to override it. And the ID is auto-incremented and is not passed by the user. And we make the request, the age is gone, and then let's just add the email. So I'm going to say email, and then I'm going to say jsmith@gmail, okay? So if we make this request, it says not a valid email address. So however, if we put .com, it works, okay? So let's just pass the name as well. So if we say name and just say JO, okay, because we said minimum of 3 characters. So if we make this request, it says shorter than minimum length. So here I'm just going to say John Smith. Do we have any John Smiths? Let's just go into the database. We don't. However, let's just use one of the emails that exist. So here I'm going to say john@google.com. Okay, so I'm going to go here and I'm going to pass this email. Well, this theoretically should return a validation error. However, let's see what it does. It doesn't do anything, okay? And if we head back to, let's close this one. If we head back to our resources, here we've commented things out, but if the validation passed, we would have tried to add the user to the database, and then we would have had an integrity constraint violation. So how do we solve this? So let's go to the user schema. We essentially need to validate the email. So we need to validate that the email is not in use. So how do we do that? So here we need to define a function called validate email. Okay, and this function will take the data that is passed to the schema and also some keyword arguments. So we're not going to use the keyword arguments, but you need to pass them. And here we're going to grab the email. So we're going to say email is equal to data.get. And here we're going to say email. Okay. And we need to decorate this function. Okay. So we're going to say add. And then here we're going to say validates schema. Okay. So we're going to import that from marshmallow. Okay. So this is fine. And here we need to do something. Okay. We need to check that our email doesn't exist within our database. If it exists within our database, it means that another user has that email and they cannot use that email. So we're going to say if user.query, and here we're going to say filter by, okay? And here we're going to say email, and then we're going to pass the email that they passed. And here we're going to count, okay? Why are we counting? So essentially, if the count is 0, this will return false because 0 is a falsy value. Anything above 0 will be true, meaning we should throw an error. Okay, so here we're going to raise a validation error. Okay, so I'm going to import this from marshmallow, okay, and here we need to pass our message. So what do we want to say here? We're going to say that email, and then here we need to pass the email already exists. Okay, so that's all we need to do. Okay, so if we head back to Postman and we make this request, here we get email john@google.com already exists. So this is essentially the error we want to pass, and this is how we want to handle the error. So if I go back, we've handled that case. So if we go into our resources, we're going to grab the validated data and we're going to create the user. Okay, so here we're just going to get the validated data and we're going to unpack it. Okay, this can go in a single line. Okay, and here we're not going to use JSONify again, we're just going to use a dictionary. Okay, all right, so here we say user created, and then as a second one we're going to say user, and then we're going to say schema dot dump, and we want to dump the new user. Okay, so if we head back to Postman, we want to change this, and we're going to say jsmith because they cannot use this email. I'm going to say Gmail, and then I'm going to make the request. Okay, so it says that the user was created. So if we head to our database of users, here John Smith is created correctly. Excellent. So what do we do now? So here we're going to try and fetch a single user. This is quite straightforward. So we're going to say schema is equal to user schema, and then we're just going to pass a dictionary. So here we're going to say user, and then we're going to say schema.dump, and then we're going to dump our user. So can we fetch the user correctly? So if we go here, we can. Excellent. So for updating a user, we are going to go here and we're going to instantiate our schema. So we're going to say schema is equal to user schema. And here the only difference is we need to set partial is equal to true. And the reason we do partial here is because we will not pass all the values that are defined within our schema, because this is an update, so we're not going to pass the email. So the schema is not going to complain if we don't pass those. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to fetch our user, okay, exactly like we did in the previous example. However, here we do not need to set this manually. So what we need to do here is we need to say user is equal to schema dot load, and here we pass the data that came from the request. So we're going to say request.json, and we also need to pass a keyword argument called instance and pass the instance that we fetched from our database, this one here. So what this does is it grabs the data from the request as well as the instance that we fetched from the database, and it creates a new user. So what we need to do here is we need to say db.session.add, and we need to add that user to our session. And then here we don't need JSONify, and here I'm going to say message is user updated, and user, here we're going to use our schema to dump our user. Okay, so if we head to Postman and we try to update our user with ID 1 with a random name and an age of 20, and we make the request, we get an error. So why do we get this error? So it says class built-in dictionary is not mapped. So the reason this is happening is because here when we're loading this, we're using our schema to load the data from our request and also our user. This is a dictionary. We need this to be converted to a SQLAlchemy model. So if we head to our schema here, what we need to do is we need to say load instance, and this is within our meta class, and we need to set this to true. Okay, so this is all we need to do. So if we head back to Postman and we retry this request, we get the updated user. So if we head to the database to check if our user was updated, here it is, random name and an age of 20. Okay, excellent. So finally, for deleting a user. So what we need here is we need to fetch our user exactly like we do. We need to delete them from the session and commit the session. So here there's no changes because we're not using any of our schema. Well, we are just, well, we're not. So we're just going to return a dictionary just for consistency's sake. So here we haven't actually done anything. So if we head to delete and we delete the user is gone. So if we head to our database table, they're gone. So we have managed to stop using JSONify. We're using our schemas to validate our incoming data and also serializing it to JSON. However, if you've realized here when we're creating a user, so let's go here and let's omit the name. So if we try and make this request, okay, here we don't need the comma. We get missing data for required field. So this, how do we change these errors? Okay, so if we head back to our schemas, here we have required, validate, and here is where we need to set the error messages. So here we can say error messages, and here we're gonna pass a dictionary. So what we do here is, depending on the error, so for example, in this case is a required error. So we're going to say required, that's the key that you use for your dictionary. And here you pass the custom name or custom error messages that you want. So here I'm going to say the name is required. Okay, so if we head back and we retry this request, the name is required. So this is a more user-friendly error message in case you want to change it. So we can also say name, and then I'm going to say here, I don't know, let's pass a number. So here it says not a valid string. That's not exactly too clear of a message. So here I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to say invalid. So here what I'm going to say is the name needs to be a string. And I can even say the name is invalid and needs to be a string. So this is a much more helpful error message. So if I retry the request, the name is invalid and needs to be a string. So yes, this has been flask-marshmallow with marshmallow and with marshmallow-sqlalchemy. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and if you have, please like, comment and share the video, as this helps the channel grow so I can keep making these videos. I upload new videos about Python and Flask, so if you want to get notified when I do, please subscribe as well as click the notification bell so you can be notified whenever a new video is released. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.